Welcome to this week's edition of Bob versus Willie. He's Bob Gerson. I'm Willie Witten. And this is the show where we get to talk about music. We go through a lot of lists. We share some opinions. Bob, today's list, what is it?
Well, we're going to be dealing with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, top 10 songs.
Bob, you start or I start?
Why don't you start today?
I'll throw it out there. I'm going to start with number 10, Into the Great Wide Open. It's off a album that is titled the same name. It was sort of a follow-up to Full Moon Fever, the epic Full Moon Fever, which didn't quite reach the same heights. I still like it. I felt like it was a great story. It's a story about a musician's journey and the things that happen with life on the road. I've always enjoyed it. Whenever it comes on the radio, I never move the dial. Bob, what do you got number 10?
Well, for my number 10, I have Here Comes My Girl, which is off their third album, Damn the Torpedoes. It was their first album on a major record label, though. But Mike Campbell is the one who recorded the actual music for it, and he gave it to Tom Petty. And then Tom Petty ended up working on it, and he was inspired by the Byrds, and he was having a hard time getting the lyrics to fit into the song. And then he was listening to Leader of the Pack by the Shangri-Las, and he started talking it. My number 9 song is American Girl, and that's off their very first album back in 1976. And coincidentally, it was the last song that he ever performed on September 17, 2017 at the Hollywood Bowl.
Really? I didn't know that. All right. My number 9 is Margarita. Now, that's not going to appear on a Tom Petty album, but it's off the Traveling Wilburys album. It's one of the ones that he wrote. It's funky. It's got some synthesizers. To me, I put it on here because it's a very upbeat song. It's a lot of fun. It shows his range. Number 8, off the classic Full Moon Fever, I have You're So Bad. It's a little bit later in the album, so it gets overlooked often by the big numbers that come earlier on that album. But I think it's one of his best songs. Bob, what do you got for those next ones?
Well, I just want to make a comment. I don't like Margarita. I don't think that's really representative of Tom Petty, even though it's with the Traveling Wilburys. It's like it's too much of a song with Bob Dylan in it, and it just is not a solo song.
Okay.
So
fair enough.
Stop Dragging My Heart Around is my number 8, and that came out in 1980 on Hard Promises. And the thing is, it was a song that was used by Stevie Nicks. Now, Stevie Nicks, if you ever checked out this video here, it's a really good video, and it has Stevie Nicks in it, even trying to get into Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. So he gave her that song as a kind of a consolation prize. And for number 7, I have Mary Jane's Last Dance. Now, Mary Jane's Last Dance, everybody assumes is about, marijuana. But at the same time, Mike Campbell was saying that it wasn't just about that. But at that time, Tom Petty was going through a divorce from his wife, Jane, and it could also be interpreted as a goodbye song.
I like that song. Didn't make my list. I went with something a little more deeper on some of these albums. Off of Wildflowers, I picked for number 7, You Wreck Me. It's short, it's punchy, it's up-tempo, it's got a great chorus. And then for 6, off of Long After Dark, I picked You Got Lucky. Bob, what do you got for your next 2? Anything as good as my last 2?
Well, Refugee is my number 6. And I mean, that was, again, from his third album, Damn the Torpedoes. And Mike Campbell came up with the original song idea when he was listening to Mick Taylor playing with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. And he gave Tom Petty the tape, and Tom Petty wrote the lyrics in like 10 minutes. But then they took 100 takes to actually get the song right, and even then they weren't sure they got it right. So number 5 is The Waiting, off of 1981's Hard Promises, which was their 4th studio album.
I don't even have the waiting on my list, and neither do I have Refugee. I think they're both great. I've got for number 5, and I think this may shock some people that it's this far back. I've got Free Falling. I love it. I'm guessing it's higher on your list, so I'll let you talk about it when we get there. Number 4, I have a song that's often overlooked. It's called Walls. It was off the soundtrack for She's the One, which Tom Petty went ahead and wrote. It was going to be sort of part of a double album, perhaps, of Wildflowers. They never quite did the double. So instead, they went with this own album called She's the One for the movie. Walls, I think, is one of his greatest underrated songs of all time. Bob, what else you got?
Well, for number 4, I have Southern Accents.
Okay.
And Southern Accents came off of the album of the same name. And Tom Petty wrote it when he was all by himself in the studio one morning at about 4:00, he said. And he was just sitting at the piano and kind of recorded it on a cassette recorder. And the next day he brought it in to the studio and they recorded it with just the piano, bass, and side stick. And at the same time, it was redone with Tom Petty arranging it for Johnny Cash on his American 2 Unchained album. And that's really a great version too. Running Down a Dream is my number 3, and that appeared on his solo album Full Moon Fever in 1989. And it was a collaboration between Tom, Jeff Lynne, and Mike Campbell.
Yeah, I like that song. My number 3 is, you've already mentioned it, American Girl. So no need to say it more. I have it up higher than you. I think it's iconic. Of any song, it's the song that I feel most embodies Tom Petty's spirit of the music. He's very American. He's, not to categorize him, but he's Americana. I love that song. Number 2, I have I Won't Back Down, the second track off his epic Full Moon Fever. Bob, I'm thinking Tom now, Bob. You're now Tom. Tom, tell me what is next on your list of your songs.
Well, Free Fallin', which you already named, it's my number 2. And again, off Full Moon Fever. And it was a collaboration between Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne after Jeff Lynne left the Electric Light Orchestra. And, you had that collaboration going on with Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, George Harrison, and Tom Petty. And it was just an interesting sound. But at the same time, one thing that one of my sons pointed out to me is he really didn't see that much of he wasn't impressed that much, considering you had 5 of the greats together.
Really?
There's a couple of great songs, but all in all, I think it inspired their later own albums rather than the Traveling Wilburys. Now, for number 1, I put I Won't Back Down.
Okay.
And I Won't Back Down is definitely a classic song. And at the same time, it was a biographical song about a horrible incident. It's like some crazy guy tried to kill Tom Petty and his family by setting his house on fire. And so he is writing the song about that. And he actually didn't want to release it because he thought it was too personal, but it ended up that everybody has traumatic experiences that they need to not back down from.
Yeah, it's a great song. I believe maybe it's Florida, the University of Florida football games now. They do that as sort of their break where everyone in the stadium sings along. It's ubiquitous in our culture now. Everyone knows it, at least if you haven't been living under a rock. My number 1 is a song you've already mentioned. I put Running Down a Dream. And the only thing that kept me from maybe not doing this as number 1 is because it's so heavily dependent, once again, on a name we keep hearing is Mike Campbell. His buddy since they were starting off with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Mike Campbell's guitar work on this song, I feel like you can put it up, maybe not technically, maybe not as virtuosic, if that's a word, as some of these other guitarists, but the end of that song is pretty much Mike Campbell carrying the whole tune. Tom Petty, of course, has that very acerbic, dry way of singing. The music video to it was tremendous. I just think it's one of the greatest songs of all time. So we've gone through our list. Bob, you took issue with Margarita. I put in Margarita because I felt that for the reasons you didn't like it, I did. I felt that it showed that he could branch out. I'm going to take aim at one of your songs. Do you think The Waiting? Tell me why you think The Waiting gets the number 5 spot on your list, because I'm not saying it shouldn't be in a top 10, but it seems a little bit high at number 5.
Well, The Waiting was a song that was inspired, according to Tom Petty, by something that Janis Joplin said about that she loved performing on the stage, but the waiting was the hardest part.
Really?
And I thought, that's really true, because there are things in my life that I've really looked forward to doing. And I wanted to do them. And the waiting was the hardest part. And by the time the event happened, it was almost like anticlimactic. And I just thought that song had a lot of relevance.
Final thoughts before we let everyone go, Bob? What do you think about Tom? I know he's high on your list of all-time greats.
Well, I love Tom Petty, and I saw him perform 4 different times. And every time I saw him, he was great. And it's a shame. I wish that he would have gotten his hip surgery and canceled his tour, because that's what killed him.
Yeah.
The painkillers that he was using because of having to need a hip replacement.
Yep. Well, his music stays with us, his memories, great stuff. Unfortunately, Bob, this is the point where we are overtime once again. So for all of you who have stuck with us this long, please put some comments in the section. If you think we're missing songs, if you think some of the songs are too high, honestly, put your own top 10 in there. Like it if you do like it. If you don't, tell us why we're idiots. That's okay too. We're grown men, maybe. Bob is, me not so much. But this is all we got this time. For Bob Gerson, I'm Willie Witten. We'll see you next time on Bob versus Willie.